Some breaking news into the newsroom. CNN is reporting that legendary newsman and business entrepreneur Ted Turner has died at the age of 87. Ted Turner is largely credited with transforming the television landscape. In 1980, he launched CNN as the very first live 24-hour news station, but he began his career long before that.
You worked at CNN for many years, and Errol
as well. Look, when I joined CNN, the legacy, as I'm sure it still exists today, permeated through almost everything we did at CNN. It really did feel, I would talk to people who had worked with Ted when he was still running CNN, who would say things to me. They would talk about Ted in almost mythical terms. And you absolutely felt at CNN that you were part of something that he had created, but that in almost everything, the way we were trained, the way we learned how to report in the CNN way, the kind of breaking news stories that we did, how we were launched into big breaking news stories as a unit, was very much from the mind of Ted Turner. And remember that when CNN launched in 1980, it was the laughingstock. It would be great to talk to some people here at CBS News who worked at CBS News at the time of the launch of CNN, and I promise you they will say that they thought it was a joke, that there was nothing that Ted Turner was going to do in the news business that would ever erode what the networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS were doing at the time. And they were called Chicken Noodle Network. That's how much respect they didn't have in the business.
And his idea back in 1980 was so ambitious. I didn't join CNN International until 2008, but even at that time, Ted was still doing programs to welcome new people.
Yes.
There was a mentorship program
That's right.
well into the 2000s. And if you rewind back to 1980, people were laughing at Ted Turner, who wanted this strange concept of a 24-hour news channel. And he famously said when they opened Techwood, which is where CNN has moved back to in Atlanta now, you see a black and white image, he said, this will be the first footage that we will show, and CNN will only go off the air at the end of the world. The last thing you'll see on CNN's footage is the end of the world. This ambitious effort to give people news, not just during a morning show or during the evening news, a thing that CBS News helped to pioneer, but he pioneered 24-hour, round-the-clock news that people could access on their cable television. And he thought it could stand up to the journalism of networks like this one.
Well, how you saw that play out, and we're going to run an obituary from our Lee Cowan in just a moment, but how you saw it play out is I remember very distinctly. I was in college when the first Gulf War broke out.
That's right.
CNN was the only news network to have live footage as the attack on Saddam Hussein began. And you talk to the old timers at CNN, they have incredible stories about how they were actually able to accomplish that. But I remember watching in my apartment, in my college apartment, I didn't care about CBS, didn't care about NBC, didn't care about ABC. I was glued to CNN, and so was the entire world. And that moment put CNN, and some of the people, I'm looking over at Wolf Blitzer right now in our newsroom who's talking about Ted, put people like Wolf Blitzer on the map.
That's right.
So Lee Cowan, as I said, has a look back at Ted Turner's career and his legacy.
What did we were 15 and 3/8 yesterday?
Ted Turner was never a man to shy away from a challenge, on land or sea. Whether bringing the America's Cup back to the U.S., saving the American bison, getting the Atlanta Braves to the World Series, or changing the way we all consumed news.
We intend to cover all the news all the time.
Ted Turner can only be described as an American original.
I'm a multifaceted person. I've got a lot of different personalities.
He was a hard-drinking, cigar-smoking adventurer. He had kind of an Ernest Hemingway vibe, just with deeper pockets.
I get thousands, millions, and billions mixed up.
Turner had all kinds of nicknames, the Mouth from the South and Captain Outrageous. He was for some as unlikable as he was invincible. But in 2018, he disclosed to CBS Sunday Morning's Ted Koppel he was fighting Lewy body dementia.
Can you tell us what that is?
It's a mild case of what people have as Alzheimer's.
His memory back then hadn't forgotten his 3 marriages, especially the one to Jane Fonda.
Have you ever quite got over her?
No.
Do you think you ever will?
No. When you love somebody and you really love them, You never stop loving him.
Ted Turner's legacy will always be paired with CNN. And yet, the gift he seemed most proud of was the natural habitats he saved by buying and protecting more wild acreage than almost anyone in the U.S.
You ever ride your whole property here?
No, but I've ridden quite a bit of it.
It's tempting to call him a master of his domain, but he'd prefer caretaker. We don't own anything, he said. We just borrow it for a while. Lee Cowan, CBS News.
I mean, Lee puts it so beautifully and eloquently that Ted Turner was, and as we were talking about CNN, we obviously failed to mention the Atlanta Braves, World Series, his superstation TBS, TNT, his
Ted's
marriage to Jane
Grill,
Exactly.
restaurants.
Yes.
one of the largest
He was
landowners.
an entrepreneur. He famously had a feud with Rupert Murdoch, which lasted for many, many years, although I think subsequently they made amends. One of the things that I was reminded of as I was watching that obituary is CNN at the time, when I joined about the same time that Errol did back in 2008, had a program where they would pay you they would pay your tuition if you were in school. Not the entire tuition, but there was tuition reimbursement because Ted believed in that. Yeah. Ted believed in mentoring. Errol pointed out the mentoring program. When I joined CNN, they had a very extensive mentorship program. And also, I remember being astounded that everybody who joined CNN at the time, whether you were a production assistant or an anchor, everybody started out with like a very significant number of vacation days. Not like your typical 2-week, no.
That reflected his values.
It reflected his values. And people would say, and I would say, why? Why do we do this? And they would say, because that's what Ted wanted. You know?
And that is actually something that has become more rare over time, that the original founders of media companies stay, they keep an imprint, they stay present. He wasn't as much involved in the daily operations once you got into the 2000s. And as Vlad mentioned, he was mocked for his ideas back in the 1980s, the idea of a 24-hour news channel. But it was the Iraq War in the early 90s that really allowed CNN to gain legitimacy in the eyes of people, not just in the US, but around the world. I remember when I was in England as a young child, my stepfather was in the US Air Force and stationed in the Gulf during the first Iraq War, and we were glued to the television, worried about what was happening with our families. And you watch those green nighttime vision goggles and footage of the missiles and the munitions flying through the air, and it really transported people for the first time to the location of where a war was taking place. And you had Bernard Shaw and others, Wolf Blitzer back then, who were cornerstones of that coverage, and throughout the 90s. And so to hear of Ted Turner's passing now, you see him there with the former head of the United Nations. Way back when, he really was a man who was with Kofi Annan. He was with all sorts of world leaders and continued to have an imprint. And in many ways, CNN was his child. He also had these interesting edicts. At one point, I believe, he didn't like the word foreign, and he banned the use of the word foreign at CNN, and instead you were supposed to call things international, which is a big reason why
we were international correspondents. We were international correspondents. We were not foreign correspondents. He didn't like that term.
I mean, there is a slight change in kind of the.
He also had this thing where
he
would say, you would say, I work for Ted Turner, and he would correct you and say, no, you work with Ted Turner.
Wow.
That's that. And I don't know, Errol, are you part of? I just logged on to Facebook because I'm a member of the CNN alumni Facebook page.
I've seen those groups.
Yeah, and so I immediately turned to that because you're now starting to see the number of people who work specifically and directly with Ted who are commenting now on the news. If you're just joining us here on CBS News 24/7 mornings, that CNN founder and entrepreneur and pioneer Ted Turner has died at the age of 87. And I'm just starting to see, even from people that I know, Steve Stahl, heartbroken. This is a quote, heartbroken, even though I knew for a long time this day was coming. It is an honor. It wasn't my honor to work with him. He would always correct you if you said work for him. Paul Karen, like I posted earlier this week, thank you so much, Ted, for creating an opportunity of a lifetime for this punk from Detroit who had never gone farther than Windsor, Canada, travel-wise, and experienced the biggest international and national stories from the front row of history. People like Ted, Eason, Tom, these are people, the execs at CNN at the time, and many others helped create a pretty darn good life for me. We'll be saluting him in a newscast in Savannah tonight. So you're going to see, I think, over the course, because so many people who are in this business now, at some point or another, worked with Ted Turner, and you're going to start to see those tributes pouring out.
And in many ways, he helped put Atlanta on the
yes,
TV
that's another
production
point.
map.
Yes,
Ted Turner
Errol.
was very particular in launching this ambitious effort to have a 24-hour news channel, that the headquarters stay in Atlanta. And he wanted to make sure that the company and the network didn't lose sight of quote-unquote regular Americans in places outside of big cities. And it's a big reason why, to this day, Atlanta really has transformed. The CNN Center, where the company was previously based because it grew so big, was the home of CNN, what we would call domestic, CNN International, CNN en Espanol, some of the other stations, and you could go on tours in Atlanta.
I went on tour, and you took me around the newsroom and
the CNN newsroom
this
tour.
was like
it was a
before
big deal.
I worked in news, really. But what you guys described is this is not just a businessman or an entrepreneur. This is someone who created a culture,
Really?
And that culture permeates throughout the news industry. You know, I know all of us at CBS who've been affected by this culture, who've grown from this culture. And so thank you guys both for sharing these
I want to read
wonderful
one last quote
tributes.
before we go to break from Stephanie Cook, who was a CNN alumni. She posted on the CNN alumni page. I think it really sums up what we've been talking about. The balls of this man to blaze the trails he did. I will be forever grateful I got to work at CNN while he still owned it, and I had a say in the hand that steered, the ship. I talked to my journalism students about his innovation and his drive, and I hope against hope that his lessons passed on will possibly allow journalism to find a way through these times. Thank you, Ted.
Yeah.
Perfect tribute. Vlad, thank you for reading that.